Yeah, dear ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this year's Raif Badawi talk, which is presented to you by the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom and the German Publishers and Booksellers Association. I am honored to be the host of this year's talk. My name is Tamina Kutscher. I'm a Slavicist and journalist dealing and focusing on Russia and Middle and Eastern Europe for many years already, and also dealing with the topic of media freedom and disinformation. So, digital press freedom between control and propaganda, this is the topic of this year's Raif Badawi talk. And looking at the news, ladies and gentlemen, it seems this is a very urgent topic, sadly. In the last few weeks, we all learned that threats from Russia are increasing in Germany. The German Federal Intelligence Service, BND, warns of sabotage, espionage, and cyber attacks. And of course, these attacks are part of a broader strategy. So today's panel will analyze how within autocratic regimes, journalists are particularly affected by this development as they increasingly become targets. We want to examine how autocratic governments are using digital technologies not only to manipulate the public, but also to monitor and intimidate journalists and the press. So, Raif Badawi's name in the title of our talk today honors this courageous blogger and reminds us how dangerous it can be in some countries to say and write what you think. How courageous some journalists and bloggers are doing their journalistic work, no matter the risk, and knowing what a high price they might have to pay for it. So we want to analyze which digital threats journalists are facing, how journalists are coping with these new threats, and what strategies media can develop to help society to become more resilient against disinformation and other forms of digital control. So, but before we open the discussion with our outstanding guests today, I'm honored to welcome for some opening remarks to today's panel, first of all, Gisela Pilz, member of the Board of Trustees of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. Please, Gisela, the floor is yours.
This is better. Wow, this is loud. Dear Ms. Ensaf Haidar, dear panelists, dear guests and brave journalists, Raif Badawi, the name that brings us together today, stands for the courage to stand up against injustice and to fight for freedom and expression. Ladies and gentlemen, as a member of the Board of Trustees of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, it is my great pleasure and an honor to greet and welcome you to this talk. Journalists are beacons for freedom of thought and speech in these turbulent times, where we witness a global decline in democracy. These freedom fighters, I think that's a good expression for them, face many challenges. Every day they must fight against disinformation, propaganda from dictators or recently tech billionaires, against persecution and threats, even while in exile, to inform society about the truth. Just last Sunday in Tehran, the Iranian journalists Niloufar Hamedi and Elahe Mohammadi were sentenced to 5 years in prison in a political motivated trial. Why? Just because they independently reported on the protests and crimes of the Mullah regime following the death of Mahsa Amini. I'm sorry, this is who was brutally murdered by the morality police in Iran. Today, we will not discuss only the challenges journalists face, but we will also honor their tireless commitment and courage in the fight for freedom of speech and independent journalism, which is essential to human rights and is a fundamental pillar of every democracy. Dear Ms. Haidar, the story of your husband reminds us that the freedom we enjoy here so effortlessly is paid for at a high price in other parts of the world. 10 years of imprisonment, lashing, and then restrictions on his freedom of movement for his words. This shows us how precious and yet fragile the truth is. In this age of digitalization and social media, which were once seen, not that long ago, as bearers of hope, platforms are increasingly being undermined by those who fear free journalism. Autocratic regimes use surveillance tools like the Pegasus spyware and flood the media landscape with disinformation, and even more, as you told us just in your opening remark. Even journalists in the European Union were not safe from the threat of illegal spyware abuse, such as Pegasus. However, a policy paper by our foundation, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, titled "Watching the Watchdogs," highlights positive measures that have been taken. In December 2023, the European Union took a historic step, the European Media Freedom Act. This breakthrough now offers stronger protections for media professionals. Surveillance measures are now only allowed in exceptional cases and under strict judicial oversight. Actually, a matter of course. In particular, the abolition of national security exemptions as a base of surveillance was celebrated as a significant advancement in the fight against unjustified surveillance. Today, human rights defenders and journalists are facing increasing threats from authoritarian governments that seek to restrict press freedom and use surveillance tools to silence critical voices. They are increasingly confronted with negative campaigns aimed at manipulating public perception and making their work more difficult. Additionally, physical violence and legal repression in countries like Russia and China remain constant dangers, seriously threatening the courage and independence of reporting. But, as we know, the truth cannot be permanently suppressed. We will always find a way to bring it to light, carried out by courageous journalists who raise their voices, even if it costs them everything, even their life. Ladies and gentlemen, journalists and human rights defenders need our support. It is our responsibility to ensure that they can work without fear of surveillance or censorship, even and especially when they are in exile. At this point, I would like to thank Ensaf Haidar from my heart. Your tireless efforts for the freedom of your husband, for justice and for human rights are an inspiration for us all. You remind us that the fight for freedom is never in vain, even if it's long and painful. Thank you so much. I wish you all a fruitful discussion and successful exchanges in this year's talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Gisela Pilz. I am honored to ask also Margit Ketterle, Chair Freedom of Expression Foundation and member of the board of World Expression Forum, to this stage. Welcome, Margit.
Thank you very much. Good evening, or good afternoon, sorry. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear panelists, dear guests, and online audiences. So it's my great pleasure again, Ensaf, to welcome you. A big applause. It's wonderful that you made the trip from Canada and be with us. I hope it's true that you're still living in Canada and that your husband is not able to leave Saudi Arabia still, which is a cruel thing to do to your lives. I'm trying to shorten my remarks because I would not want to repeat what all of my predecessors already have said. So this yearly panel is wonderfully organized by the Freedom of Expression, by the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, and I really thank them, and also Mrs. Pilz for her remarks. And it's wonderful that we can cooperate in this sense with our group, which is the Freedom of Expression group in the Börsenverein, for which we now have a foundation for freedom of expression, which I have the honor to chair. And I'm also, as already mentioned, a board member of the World Expression Forum. And today's topic already has been introduced to you, but I have a few additional thoughts, I think. The rising threats to democracies and the growing undermining of freedom of expression by digital means, surveillance, cyber attacks, exploitation of data, creation of misinformation, fake news, transnational media and election interference, political manipulation, and sabotage. It seems to me that we do not have enough words to name all the techniques and tools which autocracies, authoritarian rules, and extremists in our own democratic societies are using to counterfeit information and suppress the truth about illegal practices. And I have not yet even uttered the new magic word AI, artificial intelligence. And considered all the above, it looks like we have to say goodbye to the initial idea of increased participation and democratization through the internet. On the other hand, I think we must ask what it means for the communication of dissident groups and marginalized individuals if they can't access digital channels to reach the public. Internet shutdowns in various countries are in many cases considered censorship and oppression of free speech. However, where free speech turns into disinformation and lies, where freedom of expression turns into a means of radicalization, and that's their business model, don't forget it. Do liberal societies rightfully interfere and limit it? And yes, and if yes, when and how? To help us navigate these fundamental issues of freedom of expression, we have here today really seasoned investigative journalists and activists, and I'm really happy and look very much forward what they will tell us firsthand about the perils as well as the gains of their audacious work. So thank you and feel welcomed.
Thank you very much, Margit Ketterle. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to present you also a video statement today, a statement by Konstantin Schreiber. I'm sure many of you know him as a journalist, author, and anchorman on German TV. He's also the co-founder of the Raif Badawi Award.
In a world in turmoil, freedom of speech is more important than ever. Authoritarianism is on the rise, and so are attempts to suppress voices demanding freedom and change. Raif Badawi represents these voices. His fate reminds us of how fragile freedom is. I thank his wife, Ensaf Haidar, and Friedrich Naumann Foundation for their unwavering support and their efforts to stand up for freedom of speech. In a world in turmoil, freedom of speech is more important than ever.
Thank you very much. Again, as Konstantin said and Gisela Pilz before, truth is fragile and precious, and this is why we need all these outstanding journalists that are courageous voices that remind us of the truth. And so I'm very, very happy that there's one of these fierce voices for freedom with us today. It's Ensaf Haidar, Raif Badawi's wife. Please, Ensaf, the stage is yours.
مرحبا جميعا وشكرا لحضوركم اليوم.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us.
في مثل هذا الوقت من كل عام نأتي إلى هنا بدعوة كريمة من قبل منظمة فريدريش نومان لنتذكر شخص مسالم ورمز من رموز حرية الرأي والتعبير في السعودية.
Around this time, every year, we come here together on the kind invitation of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation to remember one of the peaceful persons and a symbol of freedom of speech in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
رايف بدوي الذي بالرغم من إطلاق سراحه منذ حوالي 3 سنوات لا زال رائف ممنوع من السفر لمقابلتنا نحن عائلتي في كندا. شكرا لكم جميعا، شكرا دائما وأبدا فريدريش نومان، شكرا لكل الحاضرين اليوم. وأنا قصرت الكلمة لأنه في عندي أسئلة وأجوبة.
Raif Badawi, who despite his release 3 years ago is still banned from traveling, still banned from rejoining with us, with his family. So thank you all for coming once more, and thank you also once more to the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A, and that's why I spoke very briefly.
Still want to take the chance and ask you just a very few questions, and maybe start with a rather personal question. But how are you? How are you? How is Raif? And how are your children dealing with the fact that you haven't seen each other for such a long time?
بصراحة إنه أكثر سؤال صعب بالنسبة لي وأنسأله من تقريبا 13 سنة إنه كيف حالنا؟ أكيد الانتظار إلى الآن صعب. في الأول كان رائف في السجن فكان نحارب على إنه يكون حر. فالآن كمان 10 سنوات منع من السفر ولا زلنا في انتظار. فأكيد الوضع بالنسبة لي وللأولاد والرائف يعني صعب.
Frankly, this is a very hard question to answer. I think this question has been asked for 13 years now. And every time I'm asked, how am I think it changed, because at the beginning it was very hard to wait because we were waiting while Raif was in prison. We were fighting for his release. And now he's released, but he has a 10-year travel ban imposed on him. So I think for me, for the children, and for Raif, it's quite hard.
And are there currently any talks or any diplomatic efforts going on to get your husband released from this travel ban?
إلى الآن يعني بالنسبة لقضية رائف بالضبط ما في أي محاولات، ولكن في البرلمان الكندي اللي هم بارتي كيبيكوا، حزب الكيبيكوا، عملوا زي استطلاع بأنهم يعطوا رائف الجنسية الكندية. وأتوقع أنه الآن يعني بالنسبة لرائف هو محتاج لجنسية أي دولة، فإحنا نحاول إنه نعطيه الجنسية الكندية حتى إنه كندا كدولة تقدر إنها تطالب في رفع السفر وضم رائف معنا في كندا.
So up until now, for Raif per se, there are no diplomatic efforts, but nonetheless, there is a motion in the Canadian Parliament from one of the Canadian parties in the Parliament to have him neutralized and to get the Canadian citizenship, because we think that if he has another citizenship beside his Saudi citizenship, it would probably be a good reason for Western government to interfere and to demand the lift of the travel ban.
Thank you very much, and Saf, all the best to you, to Raif, and we keep remembering him and his fate and his courageous reporting here at the Raif Badawi talk. Thank you for coming.
أنا كمان أشكركم جميعا، شكرا على كل اللي تعملوه بالنسبة لرايف، وشكرا لكل الناس اللي لسه رائف في ذاكرتهم ولسه يعملوا مانيفستاسيون عشان إطلاق سراح رائف، إطلاق سراح رائف من حظر السفر يعني. شكرا لكل الحاضرين وإلى اللقاء.
And I thank you, and thank you everyone for coming and for your efforts and for the continuous efforts to try to lift the travel ban so he can rejoin us. Thank you very much once more.
Thank you. Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, when the internet started, we said it before already, it was like this big hope. It seemed that there's this new free space where oppressed voices could be heard. So Raif Badawi started as a blogger. He founded his own website. And today we have to learn that and to witness that oppressive regimes have learned to use digitalization for their own purposes. And I'm very glad to discuss the threats, the challenges, and maybe also some solutions today with 3 dedicated journalists and media experts. This is, please come to the stage, Irina Baragan from Russia, now in exile. Thank you. Irina is a renowned Russian investigative journalist and author specializing in topics such as state surveillance and power structures. And together with Andrei Soldatov, who is also here with us today, she has published several books which provide in-depth insights into the role of the intelligence agencies and surveillance technologies in Russia. We're very glad you're here once more. Welcome, Irina.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you. I also want to welcome Hanin Zbis. She is an award-winning investigative journalist from Tunisia, also winner of the Raif Badawi Award in 2019, actually, known for her courageous reporting on sensitive, often risky topics such as corruption, human rights abuses, and extremism. So a very important voice for journalism in the Arab world. We're glad to have you here. Welcome, Hanin.
Thank you.
Yeah, and last but not least, a very warm welcome also to Scott Griffin, the interim executive director of the IPI, the International Press Institute, a global organization dedicated to protecting press freedom and the safety of journalists. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
Scott, I want to start with you to give us a broader overview. Since the IPI is monitoring also digital surveillance and press freedom worldwide, so we know that digital technologies are used by repressive regimes to monitor journalists. So what was the most recent case that landed on your desk, and how great is the threat actually posed by such technologies to press freedom?
Thanks. Before answering that, I just want to say how important it is to have Ensaf here and to be able to speak about Raif's case. It is a case in which he is free, but also not free to travel and rejoin his family. It's been so many years, and I think these are the kind of cases that are easy to forget, but we can't forget them. So I want to thank the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung for not forgetting Raif's case. As you said, I mean, the threats, the digital threats to journalism and press freedom, there are many of them. Just to give a very recent example, I mean, earlier this year, it was revealed that a number of investigative journalists and human rights defenders in Jordan were subject to surveillance by Pegasus, which is a type of spyware, invasive spyware. And these journalists and human rights defenders were known for critically examining the Jordanian government. But this is just, really a drop in the ocean, because we've seen over the past few years countless examples of journalists and also human rights defenders who have been targeted with different forms of spyware. And just to briefly say what we're talking about, I have my mobile phone here, and this is a type of spyware which infects people's devices, usually with zero click, meaning you don't need to click on any suspicious links, Pegasus, and it has access to your entire device. It has access to your camera, to your microphone. It can get around the type of software like WhatsApp and Signal that we use for end-to-end encryption. So it's an incredibly powerful tool, meaning that it poses a huge risk to journalists, to source protection, to journalist safety, and it also is a form ultimately of harassment, and I think it has the ability to put journalists off from doing their work. If you know that you are under or potentially under this type of extreme surveillance, I do think it can lead to self-censorship. And the example that I mentioned of Jordan, again, it's just one example of many. We've seen this type of software used against journalists all over the world, India, Mexico. It was used against the Jamal Khashoggi's inner circle around the time of his murder at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. It's also been used in Europe. It was used to target journalists in Hungary, for which there has been no accountability. And similar forms of this of software, in this case Predator, was used against journalists in Greece. So this is a big problem, and it is a severe threat to press freedom, and it's one form of digital attacks that we see.
What other digital attacks do we see? So we're talking about Pegasus all the time, but this isn't the only one.
No, that's right. So, I mean, there are other issues. One is cyber attacks against the press. So, for example, DDoS attacks, which target the websites of media organizations, including our own organization. IPI was the target of a major DDoS attack last year after we reported on DDoS attacks against Hungarian media. It took our website down for 3 days. We're also concerned about other forms of surveillance. Think about biometric surveillance, for example, facial recognition, and what that means for journalists who are out there doing their work. But also, of course, the weaponization of social media, targeted smear campaigns against journalists. And a related issue is the ways in which governments are learning to regulate the internet space. I mean, we heard about this already, but an increasing number of cybercrime laws, which it's a slightly different look at the issue, but governments are increasingly policing. Authoritarian governments, also illiberal governments, are policing the cyberspace and using the excuse of combating cybercrime, actual cybercrime, and using that as an excuse to target free expression online and journalism.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, for this overview and for this example of cybercrime laws, which actually brings us to Tunisia. And so Tunisia has gone through both democratic and authoritarian phases, and we know it's a country where the Arab Spring started in 2011, and now there were recently upheld elections in the beginning of October, and President Zayeti received 90% of the votes, so this high number might indicate how democratic those elections actually were. Could you describe how has the media landscape evolved, especially with regard to the government's use of digital technologies or the cybercrime law to monitor and to control journalists in Tunisia?
So what happened in Tunisia, it started in July 2021 when there was a coup d'etat. And the President Said took all the powers and freed the parliament and asked the chief of the government to dismiss. Then we started a new epoch in Tunisia with a lot of restriction on activists, on journalists, on independent media. And we started the campaign of putting in jail those activists. But in 2022, there was a new event, which is the promulgation of a new law, the law 54, yes, it's about cybercriminality. This law was intended normally to reduce hate attack message, cybercriminality on social media, excuse me. But what happens really that this law was used to put in jail all the critical voices against the regime. And now we have like 170 personalities. Among them there was politicians, activists, journalists. They are jailed because of this law. And this law was used especially in this last electoral campaign to stop any critical voices of the controversial electoral campaign. So now, in the name of fighting the cybercriminality, we are using the cybercriminality laws to reinstore dictatorship, to limit freedom of expression, to attack journalists, especially female journalists as well, because female journalists are a good topic to be attacked in order to oblige them to withdraw from the public space. So now there are campaigns of cyber criminality, people that are paid by the regime to go on your Facebook page or your pages to take your personal images, videos, on your information about your private life, and to spread them on the social media and to say these are the persons that are the traitors, corrupted person, foreign agent, and this is impact the whole journalist corps, but especially the female journalists.
And did this or something similar also happen to you? So
yeah, I got a cyber campaign this week because I went to in a press tour in Ukraine 2 weeks ago, and when I started to publish my articles, I was accused to be someone who is promoting the foreign interests in Tunisia. This was one of the accusations. The second one, that since I'm publishing in a website which is an alternative media founded by foreign NGOs, so it was said that look at those persons who are financed by foreign NGOs who want to create disorder in the internal affair of Tunisia. Are an example of the traitor of the nations. And it's not something new. I was attacked, but there was a lot of my colleagues who were attacked based on that, because now the regime would like not only to put activists in jail, but to change the whole NGO's law to restrict funds to NGOs which are supporting freedom of expression, human rights. And I think that in the next month, we're going to have this reform.
This reminds very much of the situation in Russia, where we had the foreign agents law, the so-called foreign agents law, firstly against NGOs, and now it's applying also already for some time against journalists and media. Irina, so Russia as a role model, as we all know, all those things that were mentioned before, spyware, digital attacks, DDoS attacks, these foreign agent laws, certain laws, cybercrime laws, hate speech laws that are turned against media. We all know this from Russia as well, and you examined and analyzed it in your work. So can you tell us, how did Russia become so good at this?
I mean, it's not like Russians became so good at this recently. It's a long tradition which came from the Soviets, which originated in the Soviet times, when the all-powerful KGB developed surveillance equipment and a lot of surveillance physical techniques as well as electronic techniques. And they were spying over the population for many decades. But back then, it was mostly about physical surveillance, because the capacity of electronic surveillance of the Soviet population was very small because of technical restrictions. But nowadays we have all modern technologies, and Russia is kind of championing in this. So the electronic surveillance in Russia, maintained by the security services, is massive and huge. And it's not only about the journalist or activist, it's about the whole population. Let me give you one example, not particular, not connected with political situation. It's about surveillance. We have a friend who, there is Andrei Soldatov in the room, who is my co-author, and because he was put in the wanted list as a criminal for his journalist activity, his assets were arrested in Russia, including his car. But he transferred his car to our lawyer. And our lawyer still, a year ago he was allowed to drive this car across Moscow. And when because he is speeding all the time, when he got a fine, the system informed Andrei and sent him a special notice with the photographs of his car and our lawyer behind the steering wheel. And you can see, you not only can see clearly the car, you can see our friend's face and all the details and the license plate. So that's only surveillance that was implemented only for prevent speeding. But can you, the same surveillance, the same cameras was implemented across over in the yards, in the entrances into apartment building, banks, offices, government, not mentioned to government buildings, metro stations, shops everywhere. So, and the FSB and the Russian security services, they are brilliant processing these videos and this information. So the system working so fast that you can get, if you are the FSB officer, the FSB is the Russian counterintelligence and Russian intelligence service. If you are the FSB officer and you can put any photographs of a person into the system, and for 10, 15 minutes got the full report about this person for a month.
So Russia, like a master of surveillance. Irina, I want to take the chance because I know that you and Andrei, you have been analyzing the Vulkan files. I'm sure many people here in the room heard of this because it was also big in German media. It's leaked documents exposing the activities of a Moscow-based defense contractor, NTC Vulkan. Can you just very briefly, without going into technical detail, describe what can we learn from these Vulkan files about the coordination and implementation of Russian cyber attacks and disinformation?
Vulkan is a Russian company which develops software and hardware that led to take over the whole territory and intercept everything what's going on the electronic communications there. Like it's which territories? Territory big enough like a small city, like a small town. So we don't know how they used this equipment so far, but it's impossible to use. They don't need this for surveillance in Russia because they have their own systems and everything is under control, as I told. But they can use it in the war conflicts, say in Ukraine or in Syria, everywhere where Russians have some presence.
And since you investigated all these really delicate topics and sensitive topics, are there any particular challenges that you have personally experienced when it comes to your own safety?
I mean, we have been living in exile for 4 years, and now we live in London. So, to some extent, it's safe, but I mean, much safer than it used to be in Russia. But we live under police protection, and we know that there are a lot of threats, including surveillance. And once we, I mean, I try to be short and not to reveal a lot of details because it's security. But once we were surveilled by the Russian security services or their agents, possibly they were, I mean, for sure they were agents of the Russian security services in London, and it was quite unpleasant.
And there's also a lawsuit going on against one of your books in Germany, I learned.
Yes. The Kremlin has a lot of options how to suppress the Russian political emigres and the Russian journalists in exile. One of these tools is lawsuits. And this was used against us. 5 years ago, we published a book, The Compatriots, which is about the Russian diaspora persecuted by the Russian intelligence about the Russian political diaspora, persecuted by the Russian intelligence services. And the book was published in the UK, France, in the US, but it had never been translated, unfortunately, into German. 4 years passed. Nothing happened. And last year, in October, a Russian businessman, Alexei Kozlov, who was mentioned in the book, went to the Hamburg District Court and secured a ban on the audio and e-copies of their compatriots. And it was, I mean, such an unpleasant surprise to us how it could have happened, but it happened. He didn't like the description of his relationship with the Russian intelligence services, and he said that it is harmful for his reputation as a businessman. What we wrote in the book, we wrote that this businessman was promoted in his career by the Russian secret services, by the Russian intelligence. And this statement was based on his interview to me, which lasted 90 minutes.
So this is what reminds you and probably many observers of this process of a slap. I'm sure, Scott, you're also very aware of this process. It's like this strategic lawsuit against public participation, which means it's like using the law as a means to silence critics. So maybe probably without even thinking about winning this lawsuit, it's about causing difficulties and problems to critics. So is this what you do?
True. It's, I mean, I'm sure we will win in the substantial hearings. It wasn't set up, the date wasn't set up so far. But for the whole year, our book is under ban in Germany. And we spent a amount of time trying to participate in this lawsuit. So, because all interviews, they were in Russian, so we needed to translate them into English. Then our American lawyers translate, because it's...
so this is the system,
the guy came not personally for us. The guy decided to sue our publisher, which is Hachette. So it's Russian, American law, it's interview
causing
with a lot
in
Russian, then it's American, an American lawyer, and then German lawyer, and process all going on in German. So it's like a huge of consultations, a huge of conversations, discussions,
problems and stress
and stress.
So,
and I mean, I have to.
Irina, sorry to interfere, but we run out of time. But I'm sure that it's really worth. No, it's okay. It's really worth following the events and following also this lawsuit and how it will end, because it might be just another indicator that Russia is fighting its hybrid war on many fronts. Yeah, not just in the digital realm and space. Allow me a very last question that I have to all of you, because I promised that we will also bring up some solutions. So I would like to know just a few suggestions. What has to be done so journalism and journalists can adapt to threats posed by digital surveillance and posed by disinformation in the long term, and maybe emerge even stronger in the end? Who wants to start? Anin.
I have 3 suggestions. First of all, we need to improve the media literacy, to educate public how to make the difference between false information and true information, and how to detect fake news, and how to be more critical regard all the speech or the discourse that are coming from the social media. I think this is the most important thing that we need to do all over the world. Second thing that we need to maybe, I don't like the term of regulate the space of the social media, but to make some restriction, but regarding the respect of the human rights, of the ethical principle, to protect people, but in the same time to stop those people that are using the social media to attack the others and to spread hate speech. And the third point, from my point of view, we need to reinforce the solidarity between us, as a journalist, as activists, because when someone is attacked, he needs to feel that he's not alone and he is protected by his other colleague or other person that are chaining the same principle in which he believes.
Thank you. Scott.
Sure. I mean, I would say two things. So one, I think, is echoing what Anen just said about solidarity and understanding how journalists can learn from one another and to deal with these serious security threats or threats on social media. What are different strategies and protection measures that journalists can take? And I think that is really important, that we understand the threat and how we can protect ourselves. But the other side of the coin is that how do we as a society deal with this Pandora's box of surveillance, which has already been opened, and it's not just about spyware. It's also about, as Irina mentioned, it's things like license plate recognition, or it's other types of AI-powered surveillance, like facial recognition in public places, which do have an impact on free expression and press freedom. So I think, as a society, we need to understand. I mean, our organization would be pushing for a ban on many of these high-risk technologies because the risk of abuse and the threat to our rights and liberties is too high. But I think as a minimum, we need to have very strong safeguards in place about how these technologies are used. And that means setting in place rules for example, what types of, when can law enforcement, for example, legitimately use these types of tools? And we heard a little bit about the European Media Freedom Act, which is a step in the right direction, but actually it's really the bare minimum. It's still, in our opinion, too permissive about when, for example, spyware can be used. But we need really strong rules around these technologies if we are going to ensure, if we are going to continue to have an open society. So that is really the direction that we need to head. And I do think it is in some ways a race against time, because these technologies are spreading and governments are also learning from each other. Autocratic governments are learning from each other. Illiberal governments are learning from each other. And we need to do the opposite, to learn how we can best manage these technologies to the extent that they exist, and use that and spread that, I think. So that really needs to be one of the approaches.
Thank you, Scott. Irina.
I agree that the society have to control the dissemination of surveillance technologies, but in terms of slap lawsuits, we have to change legislation, because it's terrible libel legislation in the United Kingdom which allowed the Russian oligarchs filed lawsuits against journalists and won. They won many times. And as far as I can see here, it's also a lot of problem with the legislation, how the book can be banned before substantive hearings. I didn't have a chance to give the court to listen to the recordings.
And when it comes to disinformation, do you think that, like, the Western world, let's put it like this, is really prepared?
I mean, I don't think so, because, for example, here in this country, the government and the security services was kind of a little bit slow and lazy, preventing the Kremlin from spreading disinformation. And it's not also about the disinformation, it's about subversive actions, it's about surveillance, it's about putting pressure on the Russian diaspora, it's about sending threats to people in exile. So it's all, I mean, the Kremlin accelerated when the war in Ukraine started, and it seems that your security services and your society didn't catch up.
Okay, so what should we do?
There is no just a simple recommendations like you have to fight. I mean, the best thing you can to do in terms of fighting disinformation, it's strengthen your media, not to fight disinformation, but to explain society what's going on, to dissolve the trust of society. disinformation is effective when the society does not believe the media. When society believes media, disinformation could not be very effective.
Scott, did you want to add something to this?
No, I agree. I think we need to keep our media strong. We need to invest in quality, independent journalism. Ultimately, that is one of our most important weapons against disinformation. And I would just add that, this is also a trend that we see governments using disinformation laws, fake news laws, also as a weapon to target journalism. So I agree. Focus on strengthening quality journalism, independent journalism, wherever we can.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, everybody, for your messages, strengthening journalism, strengthening also the solidarity amongst journalists and law and regulation. So I thank you, everybody, for being here, and I hope to see you next year again here at Raif's Badawi Talk at the Frankfurt Book Fair. Thank you, take care, and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.